Hey there, good evening. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronx Net's program where we talk to reporters and writers and editors and journalists and all different kinds of people who are putting stuff out so you can get the idea of what's going on behind the scenes, so to speak. And in our second segment today, we usually do arts and culture, and we're going to do one of the best dance theaters in the world. Of course, we think that way in the borough of the Bronx, and that'll be our second segment. But to start, we are going to get right down to City Hall and say hello to Jeff Coltin, who's the City Hall bureau chief from my favorite political publication, City and State New York. Nice to see you, Jeff.
You too. I can do a little bit of dancing in the second half of the show if you want to.
I don't. Oh, I apparently did they have the big political festival there? You brought it up.
Yes,
I hadn't thought about it. What do they call
we
that thing?
had the Inner Circle
The
show
inner
this
circle thing.
weekend, where
Did you
other
attend?
reporters and myself sing and dance joke songs, parody songs about the mayor and about the president and politics, and then Mayor Adams has a rebuttal. It's a really fun tradition. 100 years old this year. 100 years old from 1923.
And I hadn't anticipated talking about this. Give me one the highlight that you say, boy, I saw this.
The highlight, I gotta say, was not the mayor. It was Attorney General Letitia James had a
Yeah.
pre-recorded video that was just hilarious. I mean, she
Oh,
was cracking jokes, insulting the other politicians, which everybody loves. It's very funny. It was
well,
well done.
I'm hoping to read about it maybe in City and State coming up. Anyway, as you know, Jeff, I was very taken with your story. New York City is obsessed with the bad old days. Subtitle: The fear of going backward is growing, but the city is in a much better place today. So I'm going to ask you this: was that article inspired by the Manhattan Institute's production of Gotham: The Fall and Rise of New York? Because we're going to talk about that as well.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
I heard about this new documentary coming out that kind of looks back over the past 60 years of New York City history and tells this story of New York City basically falling into disorder and crime and a hellish control of the government. And then, as the movie says, and then along comes Rudy Giuliani and cleans the thing up. And along comes Michael Bloomberg and cleans the thing up further. And then the movie ends with, Bill de Blasio with kind of ominous music. And it kind of just gives you the what happens there. You know that what Bill de Blasio
Well,
became.
so it's a political piece. I mean, it's hard to verify that as an historical piece. Maybe there's some aspect of it that needs to be told. And I have to say, you very correctly, right up near the top, said, "Oh, by the way, this was a." I hate to put it. I hate these kinds of stark racial terms, but you said this was a video made by white people who felt that they ordered the city. But of course, black people and people of color were like, wait a minute, this isn't the story of New York City.
Yeah, I mean, look, New York has always, of course, been an incredibly racially diverse city. And I did feel like having a documentary about New York City in the 90s and having one single voice, one single person on camera, a person of color. The rest of them were like 30 interviews were all white. It certainly left out a very big perspective. Now, I'm not saying that there's interesting history here. Don't get me wrong. They talked to a lot of the players, most of whom were white. Let's be frank. City council
Hmm.
speaker, the mayor.
Right.
But there was certainly a perspective missing. But on the bright side, it raised a lot of raised a lot of interesting questions in my mind, and I'm sure many other viewers. It certainly got you thinking.
Well, it got you thinking, but also it got me thinking about what is one of the things that really was really important that we learned from, let's say, the Giuliani administration. And I really think it's the CompStat and the looking at crime as you would try to solve any other problem. And I remember getting, having been on the air all this time, getting a video story. It wasn't with Bratton, but it was I forget who the Bronx chief was at the time, and he showed me how they were using at that time we didn't have digital, so they were using little pins to note where crime was. And then he said, well, so that's how we allocate our resources. I think that was something that not only we in New York learned, but everybody learned because of Bratton and Giuliani.
Absolutely. And I mean, gosh, there's no bigger fan of Comstat than our current mayor, Eric Adams. He worked on the
Good
Comstat
point.
program when he was a police officer back in the
Right.
90s. And now it seems like his answer to everything is let's look at the data. He wants to do a NYCHA stat for public housing, and really look more at statistics. And I think that speaks to this broader sense of New York is always worried about slipping back into the bad old days. Even in the modern day, no matter if you thought Giuliani was the worst mayor we've ever had or the best mayor we've ever had, there does seem to be an agreement that the 90s was a bad time and the 80s were a bad time. And
Specifically because of crime or because of other social issues as well?
well, both. I mean, that's actually the disagreement. I mean, everybody
Yes.
acknowledges the crime.
That's why I asked the question. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's the crime is without question. I mean, it was very high, incredible, more than 2,000 murders a year. Now that's down to something like 400. However, the amount of whether it be racial profiling or wholesale throwing people into jail. I mean, the Rikers
Stop and
population
search.
far
Stop
higher
and
back
search.
in the 90s. Yes, yes. Stop and frisk, stop,
Stop
question,
and
and frisk.
frisk. Yeah.
Um,
Sorry.
and I had a quote. I talked to Keith Wright, former assemblyman, still very active in Democratic
I have it right in front of me. I would take umbrage to the phrase that Rudy Giuliani saved the city. In a lot of ways, just the opposite. He tore the city apart, if you will, said Keith Wright. There you go. I had it in my notes because that was definitely the quote. Does one measure whether or not the city is doing better or not? That was one of the stories, the intellectual stories I got out of it. How would I really determine, because I have my own feeling about what was good and what was bad and who benefited and who didn't, but how good are we doing? I will tell you, based on your article, I did a little work on crime numbers. New York City of cities is like, in the top 15 in the nation of low crime per capita. That is an extraordinary number. And of course, everybody says New York's a hellhole. Anyway, what do you think about how do we
Yeah.
measure how well we're doing?
That is one of the big, greatest debates happening in New York right now. Is that
Mm,
yes, crime is historically low. The big problem is that the crime rate in New York is rising, and if things are moving in the wrong direction, and if that direction is being talked about person to person, if videos are going up on Twitter and Instagram and there's coverage in the New York Post and the local news, people keep talking about it. And there's
right.
just this feeling that the city is, whether some people think it is unsafe, some people think it's just going in the direction of not being safe. And
Hmm.
that's real. I mean, look, everybody has to acknowledge that there is a widespread perception that the city is going in the wrong direction. I noted in the story that right now, according to polls that have been going back for 25 years, going back to the mid 90s, right now, more people think New York is going in the wrong direction than basically at any time across those 2 decades.
Wow, that's fascinating. And what's interesting to me? So crime is one thing, but then there are people who don't react to crime like that, but are concerned about the social situation. I'm going to give you an example. You mentioned that the New York Post wrote three separate stories in 2021 and 22, declaring that squeegee men, the scourge of the 90s, were back. And I'm going to give you a different perspective of who those people are. And people who live near where I live, if you drive up the ramp on the Major Deegan Expressway to get off the Deegan going southbound at Van Cortlandt Park, very, very often, many times I've seen a woman carrying a baby on her back, which just breaks my heart, selling flowers on Valentine's Day, orange juice or water or whatever she can. And who this woman is not that kind of squeegee man ready to commit a crime. She's somebody, she looks like from somewhere else, an immigrant of some sort, that's a different scourge. And that's the social scourge. So thank you for giving me the forum to bring that up. But I think that's the balance of saying crime is crazy and the social issues are not being dealt with.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's what's so interesting about this narrative of whether New York is going in the wrong direction, is that people across the political spectrum and people with so many different political views can agree and disagree on certain things. Like, yes, uh, is somebody selling something on the side of the highway? I mean, is that a sign of disorder and she should be stopped, or is that a sign of poor social services and the city should be providing people like that more opportunities for legal employment? There's just different ways to handle it, different ways to consider it.
Without getting too far into that particular story, a question has arisen: is somebody controlling her? I mean, in some form. I mean, is there somebody? Where does she get those goods? I mean, there's your next investigative story for you. In the long run, what I would like to see is an edited production with somebody else doing a story from the other perspective and balance, and putting the two of them together, and maybe we could get some perspective on that. Anyway, we got about a minute left. What's coming up? What's going on? What are we putting in city and state in the future, in the near future? What are you working on?
Yeah,
Anything
look,
interesting?
outside of looking back at the past, also, of course, looking at the future. The city budget is coming up.
Oh,
And I, of course, encourage all New Yorkers to be reading coverage of that, because all the services that are provided to you, whether it's police, libraries, schools,
schools.
everything is potentially facing budget cuts, budget reductions. It's
Yeah.
going to be a big story this year.
And then, what is really a budget about? It's about priorities. And I see a number of notes on store windows and whatever: save our libraries. Do we need libraries? And on the other side, they're too expensive. Boy, it shocks me that New York City has come to that point, but that is where we're at. Listen, Jeff, giving us perspective is what you do, among the many things that you do, and we thank you, and Ralph and Annie and Rebecca and all my friends over there at City and State. Thank you so much, and we'll keep going. We'll keep having these dialogues. So important.
Thank you for your support. Read City and State, and
Yeah,
thank you for having me on.
I do. I have here's, in case you didn't see it, that's the current issue. It's not far from my grasp. Anyway, Jeff Colton, the City Hall Bureau Chief from City and State New York. Thank you so much. We are going to take a break, and then we're going to go to BAAD, BAAD, the Bronx Academy for Arts and Dance, coming up right after this.